This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome, this is Deeper Down the Rabbit Hole. We have some interesting technical problems, so we're starting a little bit late. Sorry about that. Of course, it's techno-magic show, and the only computer that's not blessed is having the technical problems. So I feel that vindicates our whole topic for today. Absolutely. So today's show is brought to you by the Wuji Zen Center. And the Wuji Zen Center offers a complete health complement, not just health, but also divinations, health, telehealth, through acupressure, Chinese diagnoses, traditional Chinese medicine diagnosis, all can be done virtually, as well as Qigong practice, Reiki training, and many other facets of spirituality. In fact, it's located in Toronto, Canada, and it's currently open. Zach, the address for everyone, if you're in Toronto.
607 Gerrard Street East, Suite 402.
Reach us virtually through wujijuan.ca. Want to spell it out for everyone, Zach?
WUJIXUAN.ca.
Correct. We want to say a few things. If people, we are been running for a little bit. We've got most of the bugs kind of worked out in the new show format. Obviously, we haven't got the last show up because I've had some house bugs, but we're working on those house bugs. And if you are listening and you would like to come on the show again, you're an author or a presenter, contact me, Andrea Vinimus, at gmail.com, and we can talk. Anyone who's cool, by cool meaning you can have a conversation as if we were in a pub, but you shouldn't be in a pub because of Corona, as if you were in a pub, we'll talk, and we're totally open to that again. But I have told Jason he may be as much of an asshole as he wants to be. So there's that. So you have to defend your positions and not just sell your stuff. That's the way it is. And that, speaking of sell your positions or defend your positions and not just sell your stuff, today we're going to talk about techno-magic in a practical way. For a lot of techno-magic stuff, practical ways. And we're going to probably go off the rails and say a lot of stuff about techno-magics. And we already had a techno-magic fail because the one computer that wasn't blessed broke down right before the show or is having sound issues. I think that pretty much proves the point. Or at least it suggests what the point will be.
Yes, I did not magically seal my laptop and now my headphone jack won't work. So I've got my speakers going on the laptop and I'm hoping not to get any feedback in the microphone. So there you go. Case in point.
Had you paid attention to all the stuff I've been saying for the last few years, you would have blessed that laptop and not have these problems. It's just silence. Everyone's like, you guys with that, Jason, huh? Well, that's the thing, right? Why do we think that a laptop is less valuable as a magical tool or a cell phone at this point than a stone or a stick? Why do we have that assumption that something like a laptop is less valuable as a magical tool? There's a lot of reasons for that, right? But we come down to a almost primitivist attitude towards technology and the modern life, and I believe a sort of not medieval, but a very human-centric worldview. We're already transhuman, in my opinion. Like, we've been transhuman since the first tool. And that's a word that people throw around, but tool work has been a part of magic. But why do people consider a wand to be superior to a technological tool? Like if we look at some crystals and we look at the composition of the elements in my iPhone, relatively speaking, they probably have some of the same components. There's some metal, silicon. There's probably even some petroleum in some crystals, a little bit, but a lot of metal, a lot of things from the earth. Why is one considered different than the other? And let's start the discussion there, because this is why techno-magic's so hard, is this issue of why is one better than the other?
Right. And I mean, I think this is, as you were saying, Andrea, a very human-centric worldview on things. I think it's also probably a fear point with people where they view technology as separate from them, right? Even though they're immersed in it consistently, right? So this is where a question is like, where did that thinking come from?
Well, I think, we can get to that, and we can start talking about a lot of the elements of the naturalist pagan kind of mentality. But the simple fact of the matter is, like, chemically speaking, my laptop is not that different from other elements of the earth. Is it just because man touched it, it all of a sudden becomes unholy, or it becomes unclean because anyone touched it or molded it? But yet when we mold stuff into a wand, it's perfectly okay. When I melt jewelry into a metal seal, it is somehow holy versus a laptop.
Right. And this, I think, also gets into a conceptual mindset with people too, possibly, right? It's not that we can't touch technology. Like we literally can touch a computer, and it's mostly just about everything in it is from the earth directly. But it's not something you don't see technology if you go walk outside, naturally speaking. I think there's that, again, fear of apprehension of, well, what is this? Which is just kind of a strange thing, considering that, again, we're in it constantly.
Right. But how many people actually know what a computer does, really, or what a microwave does? I mean, for all intents and purposes, isn't that just a magical thing then? It just magically, you turn it on and it works.
Yeah, I mean, even Jason could probably talk about this, where it's like, okay, do most people know how electricity works? Like we know the scientific understanding of it, but do really people know how it works?
Most people don't. They're afraid of it. That's why they call me to work on it, because they're terrified.
That's absolutely true. They don't know how electricity fundamentally works. They don't know how computers fundamentally works. I mean, they think they have a better understanding of how crystals work in magical circles than a computer, and it's probably actually true. Even though I might argue on how crystals and herbs work in different capacities. Now, one of the simplest things that you can do to help, and nowadays, let's be honest, job searches are virtual, job interviews are virtual, jobs are virtual. That's probably not going to change, or it's going to go more in that way. I mean, so what's the simplest thing? Well, we already covered the simplest thing. Bless your freaking machine, right? Spend some time in developing a blessing for this to make it an actual magical tool that you can use, or that it's magical in itself. Even if you're not going to use it for magic, you can then actually have a blessed stream going on when you're like on Zooming and going everywhere else. I mean, that's the simplest thing. We already saw that. Like Jason owned up to the fact he never blessed his computer. He was sort of being snarky about it, but not really. We're still going to rip him a new one because you know what? He could say that snarkiness to us, but like it's true.
Snarky? I was being stone serious. I fucked up.
Okay, well there you go. Hey.
Hey, I'm going to add something else assholey to this conversation. I'm just going to say, like, I bet you most people listening, you're more emotionally and mentally invested in your Facebook and your Twitter than what you are in any of your magical tools.
Oh, I would bet that. I would guarantee that. I mean, although, like, honestly speaking, when I had my Facebook issues, I actually saw a reduction in some of my income. So that pissed me off, thanks to Baphomet. But that's okay. I'd rather have Baphomet in my life than Facebook.
Yep.
Anyway, besides that, yeah, I would guarantee people are more invested in some of their Facebook profiles and the image they cast on Facebook and Twitter than they are in the magical tools they use to actually do magic work Although, let's be honest, how many people are actually doing magic work? It's more like lifestyle accessories for the semi-privileged, you know.
Pretty much.
I mean,
Eh,
at that point is, rough work. So that's not what's going on in a lot of those cases. But still, you're right, Jason. They're more invested in what happens on Facebook than their magical tools or their icons, their of divinity or any of those things.
Well, right. And case in point, it's like, okay, if, how many people would actually just do a digital fast where they turn off, or technological fast is the term. It's like turn off your cell phone, do nothing, and just chill out outdoors.
Not many.
I mean, most people have a real hard emotional time from that.
I've seen Andrea make that recommendation to people, and I've watched their reaction. They freak out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had that in the original Shapeshifting. People freaked out about that. And the whole point of why you would actually do that is so you can get a sense of how much influence the technology actually has. Like if you're denying how much influence the technology has, you're denying or somehow putting the technology on a lesser value than crystals or herbs. Well, how can you expect to do any magical work in a digital platform? It's just not going to happen. In fact, when I was working things out in the techno-magic, in the first version that some people, which Jason had seen of hands-on chaos magic, before it was even called hands-on chaos magic, there was a whole section on techno-magic in there. And basically, like, I would go to the university's computer labs and blow up computers because somebody else would have to fix it. And it wasn't my public computer. Try to do rituals on the computers purposely with unblessed computers and to see what would happen. More often than not, they would fail. Why would they fail? Well, technology is complicated. And before you actually start working with it to strengthen it, of course, considering it as a magical tool in itself, it's, fragile. So it's like a tool that's like very delicate glass until you sort of give it a little bit more strength to handle some of the stuff. Now, granted, there were certain goetic workings that particularly, which Jason as a paranormal investigator would probably understand this and verify that certain type of workings from the Goetia that actually seem to have more of an electromagnetic effect and kind of have issues with the computer. You got to speak, Jason. We're on Zoom, right?
I know, he's just shaking his head. It's like,
Well, I tried to get her to come on and talk about this, but my girlfriend's had a couple experiences after we did some virtual demonic work where her computer has turned itself on and started playing a song that she has on her playlist called Goetia.
That's awesome.
that is awesome.
I mean, but the same thing could blow up the computer. I blew up computers with agent work and with Hindu spirits, and I basically got it down how to protect your computer. And it just comes down to simply just initially doing protected work on your computer, which is the first and simplest style of magic. See, I don't want to take this into like some people's techno-magic is crazy with you have to have a master's degree in computer science. By the way, I do. To even understand how their magic works with the computer. We'll get into that too a little bit about why that's perhaps a little bit ego-driven, less than what's necessary. But simply drawing whatever type of bind runes or protective seals over your computer will give it with enough force that will give it some protection. It'll imbue in the system, right? That will have it run better. Now, since I'm a voodoo assant, usually me and Zach, apparently not Jason, also is our computer with a goon who's the Loa of metalworking and the Loa of it's the hardware. It's not all technology. So that's important. It's the hardware of technology, not the digital construct of the internet. So it's the physical hardware that the computer's on is often strengthened by that law. That's a simple technique. So his Festus, I could, from the Greek paradigm, probably would be another one. Any god of technology, of which there are many. I mean, if we get all chaos magically, like we could start talking about the new gods and the old gods, you know. Oh, I forgot the author now. I drew a mind blank. I had a thought, but
I know who you're referring to. Let me look that up while you keep discussing.
this is why we're transhuman already. Our memory sucks. So we just go on Google. And it's okay. You can look it up. It's not Lovecraft, Jeffrey. It's a more modern author. But we can talk about technology. So the first thing, now that we're going into an age where you mostly are going to have to use a computer to somehow communicate, possibly not only communicate, interact. The first easiest thing to do is bless the, yep, that's it. It's gaming with American gods. Zach got it. Zach, you win the prize. The first thing is to realize you could bless that hardware to actually protect yourself and protect yourself against negative, vibes to actually do magic work. So what could a protection work be like? Well, a simple protection work could just be with sitting with your computer and meditating with it to just kind of get the vibe of it. Now, people haven't thought about get the vibe of the computer, but really, if you do, it will have a certain effect, right? Like you're connecting the computer. Why is that different than connecting to a candle flame or anything else? You're allowing your consciousness to imbue the computer and then basically sitting with it until such point as you can kind of get what is classically called as a sort of machine empathic connection, but that doesn't really fit, right? Since they don't really have, computers don't have emotions in the classic sense. But you can certainly just vibe with it if you've, just sit down with it for a few minutes and kind of let your consciousness go back and forth between the computer. It'll strengthen the computer just by that, because it's like your consciousness is perceiving it as something other than it is. You're perceiving it more than just a machine that provides the internet. You're imbuing your consciousness like any other servitor into an object or a artifact or a crystal or anything, right? You're letting your consciousness flow into it. Now, whether or not you believe that the machine has a personality of its own, machines can get quirky, just like people can, depending on who's using it. I don't know. Zach?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even working on a computer that's been blessed, it's like it'll pop up searches where I'm just like, okay, you have something to say? And I see that on Google while I'm doing searches, and it just keeps pulling me to certain things.
Well, for full disclosure, that was the computer I blessed, so it is sort of weird. And then
right, so there's this augmentation of the blessing, and then, well, what I'm looking for that just naturally syncs up there.
Right. I mean, one of the things is there's lots of techno-magic type things. The blessing that I just said is a simple one. Sit with your lower dantian, sit with the machine, spend a half hour focusing on your lower dantian and the machine, and see how the machine feels different. I guarantee you that's simple. That's basically like what we covered in the Qigong exercises a few weeks ago, and it's enough to start the process, right? Then there's all kinds of other things we could do that are better, right? We could do full evocation. So Jason talked about his girlfriend doing full evocations on the machine. I've done that as well, right? Black mirror is traditionally used in various ceremonial magic, angel work, and others for scrying to kind of see the spirit. Well, what is a monitor? If you black out the screen, or you use the screen to Photoshop or something to build a triangle or a scrying thing with different symbols around it, what is that? At that point when it's black, it's shiny on the surface, it's got a black screen behind it, it's probably somewhat reflective, and your eyes are going to get tired as you stare at it, and you're going to have an effect like what the mirror is, where your eyes kind of get jiggly. That's the way I describe it, like where you're seeing stuff of the kind of self-hypnosis. Right. Yes. Sure. I'll agree. That's the monitor or the computer is a little fragile until you build it up a little. But there's no reason that's. I don't see why that's thought of as different than a black scrying mirror in any way.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly the same concept. It's just you're using a monitor instead, but I mean, you're still looking at the screen.
You're still looking at basically a screen. I mean, this gets into like, how do people actually use, what are we doing right now is we're talking on this digital. So we have the technology, the hardware, which we talked a little bit about blessings. Of course, you could like do a more formal blessing with that through a Wicca system, through blessing with like angels, anything like a goon, like we talked about. But then there's the digital thing, and the digital component does have a corresponding thing to ancient literature, but no one wants to see it yet. Our internet is a proto-astral domains. Now, let me get my sunglasses on. How's that meme go? Prove me wrong.
Nice.
It is. If you think about it, what does the astral plane let you do? Go to any place, right? Have a full imaginary sensation. Like the internet gives you clues to that, but it ultimately connects things that would otherwise not be connected, right? And thoughts that could be extended outside of your body. This is literally what the astral plane does. It just gives it a little bit more structural than the astral plane does, but it depends where you're at in the astral plane. Now, we're not talking about websites that you can go to, like you can go to websites that's similar, but what are we doing right now? We are simulating an actual in-person experience, but it's not quite as good as an in-person experience. If we want it to be as good of an in-person experience, we have to use our imagination. If we are using the internet to connect, we're still connecting. We just have to use more of our imagination. But that's very much like a sort of proto-astral plane, although everything on the astral plane deals with the triggered imagination cues. The basic solids might be there, but if you're using it from the internet for magic, the best uses I've seen are off-the-shelf tools. Like, we could use a Zoom whiteboard to share a sigil, right? We can still use our imagination to build around a Zoom thing with a simple meditation. But why does the technology not get in the way then at that point? Well, because we don't conceive of it getting in the way. Essentially, consciousness-wise, we're like letting ourselves connect in ways that if we thought about the technology as an impediment, it would be. But we don't, because it's not a magical work. It's simply us communicating and vocalizing things. But I guarantee you, like, if we showed this to someone from the 18th century, they would swear this was magic.
I think that sometimes the proof is in the concept. Like, I think people who don't think that this is viable need to try to do a ritual with at least one other person over Skype or Zoom so that they could feel how the energy transfers between person to person over the virtual landscape.
You made a lot of assumptions there, right? First, they have to be able to feel energy, which needs a lot of training before they do that, right? If they can't feel energy, then it's just for show. I mean, that's the problem. Like, we could go on a whole tangent, like basic training in magical skills is not there. It's like Instagram witchcraft, right? Like, if you're going to understand energy, a sensation thing, you have to have some basic understanding of how your body changes and stuff like that.
Well, I'd assume that the people that'd be critical of this technique would, I hope, have some actual magical experience before they criticize it.
Have you looked on the internet lately?
Yeah. I mean, I remember someone, it was in a webinar I was watching, someone said something like, oh, well, can you do Reiki distantly or virtually? And I said, yeah. Someone outright said no, because they need to have a date, birth, etc. I was like, no, you could do this digitally.
This is the definition of Reiki 2, is distance and space is an illusion. So how can that be the case that you cannot do that? That is literally a Buddhist tenet. Like,
Correct.
that literally space is an illusion. That is, our mind is trapped in the construct of space, and that's why we perceive space. That's literally Buddhism. That's literally the underpinnings of what he calls. So like for someone to say that you can't do Reiki is a fundamental understanding of even Reiki, but let alone the technology. Like the
Right.
fact
Right. Because they're like, oh, well, we need a sympathetic link. They didn't say sympathetic link, but they're like, we need a birth, time, date. I'm like, aren't those abstract as hell too? Like,
here's your picture. How's that not a sympathetic link? I mean, I can see both of you. We're talking to you.
yeah.
Speak actually in Zoom. I can see right now. Well, how's that not a sympathetic link? That's a link. Like, this is why people from like classic ancient shamanism, I hate using that term, but this is why Aborigines and, you know, other more primal shamans correctly interpreted pictures as like stealing part of your soul, because it does. It literally is a link. It doesn't really steal part of your soul, but it's still a link. I mean, that superstition is not really wrong, and everything we do is virtually linked together now. Like literally, we're always on Zoom. We're on this. We're on that. This is the link. It's a live link in real time, so it's even better than a picture of someone. I mean, a birthday, it's even more abstract than a picture. Like if you have a birthday, what does that mean?
Right, exactly. It was like, okay, so you have a birthday and all these other things are hella abstract, but you can't use a picture. But this gets into the pieces of like, well, again, what's this understand technology? Because that was a very incorrect old school perspective saying, no, you can't do that. But there is no difference in this astral understanding because they're both the equivalencies. If you can get the calibrations correct.
Right, that's the issue. It's calibrating the digital world, the digital constructs to the physical world, which is actually the biggest difficulty with astral work, is getting the astral things to actually have an impact in the physical world. It's the same calibration issue that goes on. And I think part of this gets into VR, current VR technology. Part of it gets into some other issues like about visual stimuli. Visual stimuli is generally thought of, at least in traditional Chinese medicine and Chinese and in chakra work and in energy work, to be the least reliable of the senses, because it's the easiest fooled by wishful thinking, right? So calibration to actually get your body to have a reaction is the single thing. Once you get past the, oh, technology is somehow less holy than a stone we dug out from the earth. We ripped that out of Earth, but we ripped out the materials for the computer, but the computer is somehow less holy than the stone, which I don't get. You know, I might be on a good day willing to make an argument that herb magic's a little bit fundamentally different than working with a computer.
Right.
We would both agree with that for different reasons. And that has to do with the spirits of the plants themselves. But a lot of these digital constructs seem to have lives of their own anyway. I mean, they just have different energies. It's sort of like you're waiting certain things in the world to have a romantic view of the world more than other things. So technology is bad, but the stone is good. That suggests a worldview, but that's not the way the world works, right? Right now, if you're magically not working on technology, you're stuck. What are you going to do? You're not going to have group work. Well, if you're in Florida or Texas or what? I mean, where was the other one? Alabama or
Georgia, I think it was.
Georgia. I mean, I guess they are just still doing it. Like whatever. Corona, what?
Yeah, and I mean, this gets into an interesting piece that you're saying, like, you know, this visualization being the weakest of all the senses, or visuals being, and it's kind of like the overstimulation. Like, you know, there's this one person, he does memory work, particularly for memory palaces, Anthony Metivier, right? And he was saying that, you know, this extra stimulus using VR adds an extra layer of complication because it takes you out of the direct experience, right? And that's paraphrasing what he's saying, but that's about the gist of it. So it's like, if that's your weakest sense, where are you left with from a digital framework? audio and visuals.
Well, I mean, I meant it's the weakest magical sense, not weakest magical. Like it's the easiest fooled. It can be one of the strongest senses, right? Obviously, smell is probably one of the strongest senses, actually, because that's directly neural wired. But visual cues is the most interpreted, as in you have a visual set of optics, and it's like the most interpreted by your perceptions, like as in study after study in your mind. That guy that you mentioned, he's also a PhD researcher in
multiples, actually.
So he is completely an authority on this because visual cues are so late to the game in your cognitive processing that it is going through multiple layers of perception. So that means like even now, although we're saying we can make a link, visually speaking, if we start talking about virtual reality as it is right now, it's basically clunky visual stimuli that get in the way of actually letting you get into like a sort of Gnostic state, or a trance state, because you're too busy with the bells and whistles. It's like, although there are some uses that I've seen have been useful, actually, like simple blink artistic rooms where you can kind of draw seals out. But at this point, you're basically doing sigil magic in a different form. You're doing seals, you draw a magical seal, right? But if it's too immersive, because it's not immersive enough, it sort of tricks the brain into thinking it's immersive, where your brain doesn't have to fill in the blanks with creativity to kind of immerse your imagination in it. And then you don't have the level of, I don't know, willpower. It's not willpower, it's imagination investment to get the magic to work. It's kind of like, this we know is a screen, and there's a level of investment and a ability with just a simple zoom that doesn't force our cognitive stuff to go too badly. If I had to type and do this, magic gets very difficult. We covered that a couple shows ago. Like,
yeah,
magic was actually harder because you have to actually be able to type well enough when we talked about the narrative stuff. Like, so this gets into, if it's too many things going on, your mind cannot actually become an active imaginational component, which is one of the keys to any magical work. But it's not just active imagination and visual, because that's the thing. The visual cue is the easiest trick. So it's got to be a full, as many senses as you can get, which we said before. But it's like with the techno-magic, you have to be able to create, just like you would have to be in an astral plane, the rest of the stimuli, right? Like if we were doing astral work, I have to create the stimuli, and then I have to somehow anchor it to the world, which usually is done by, honestly speaking, being able to pick enough connection points to the world, the actual things in the world, either visual cues, if you've been there, you have memory cues, or if it's a person, you have memory cues, or something.
Yeah, and I mean, it's using those parts of the brain. It's like, okay, we know the visual cortex is a big thing that's already getting overstimulated, but then you're not using your kinetic space interpretations of the brain, which is the next thing, which is the most the visceral experience you're discussing here.
Right. I mean, in Qigong, like once we start talking about Qigong, classic Qigong, like they would tell you to discount almost all trainers, not us though, we don't do this, but almost all the trainers we ever study with tell you not to even bother with the visual cues at all, because they lie. But in just classic magic, like I've seen that too, like it's easy to visualize whatever you want, but that just, until you feel it, most of the time magic fails.
Yeah, because again, you got to be in it, meaning your whole everything, right? So.
Right. I mean, from my perspective, if you already start with the computer as evil, right, or technology is evil, and then you're trying to get a sensational, set of sensations to flow through you from the computer, how's that going to work? Like, you're already defensive because you're like, the computer is less holy. I mean, we could do a whole Agora show about just this and just talk about Shiva like stuff, the whole show about how technology is Agora for a lot of people. Like, so let's do magic on the computer is the same as saying, let's go eat graveyard, like, let's go eat like ash from a graveyard. It'd be similar, like similar taboos, although people don't realize it.
Well, right. It's like this again. It's kind of a double bind there because it's kind of like if we're going to bring it into that Hindu place, people like the Vishnu aspects of oh, this is distracting, but then you actually look at the deeper core, and they would probably be horrified at their viewpoints of technology.
So, okay, guys, I think we've talked a lot about justifying the medium of using technology to do magic. Let's talk about doing some actual magic because I think we're getting kind of far into the show now.
Well, didn't we already talk about blessing your computer like you didn't? I thought we did.
Yes, you did. But I mean, I think we could talk about other uses too in this hour. That's all.
Yeah, well, we also have a second hour where
Yes.
sponsor. We're going to go into some stuff, but the first, again, a lot of the technology uses we covered some already. Full ceremonial magic without the tools, you just use your computer. I mean, depending on how classical you want to be, when we have Stephanie on the show, that wasn't very classical, but all of us here are probably on the general highway that you don't need the tools per much, say, and a really well-crafted image for digital artists could have the same impact as a well-crafted physical one, I think, if somebody is really good at Photoshop and really puts time and effort into it. I mean, that's something you simply can stare at, right? On the computer. That's very simple. We could do an angel work just with that. And where is that going to lead? I think this is the important thing. Well, if you have a blessed computer that can handle the energies, right? So it doesn't break down when you're in the middle of a ritual, or where does that lead? Well, eventually what that's going to lead to is something where your active imagination is greater than the technology that's here. As in, you're no longer seeing the technology as a bound piece of technology, right? There's weird stuff happening, at least in your head with what's going on. Maybe you're staring at that screen, right? So this is a simple angel summoning would be this way, right? You're there, but because you're not have too much on your screen and you're minimize it, the other distractions, you're seeing and getting to a weird state of self-hypnosis that is going to lead to general magical work. We were literally doing that almost. You had an altar, but we didn't need it. When we did the Dantalian summoning, we didn't have anything. We didn't even have a real altar.
Nope, that was green screen.
That was green screen to kind of lead into where we're going. And not only was it green screened, but in actual practical magic for the people who weren't there, it was actually not only green screen, but I was running the ritual, and the green screened was at Zach's temple, which kind of tells you what's possible, right? In other ways, simple magical work, once the computer's blessed, we could connect to each other because the technology is not the issue or isn't what is important. It's merely us focusing our consciousness between each other that will create the magical bonds or an energy circuit between us. It will follow along the technology just because we're using the technology, but it's not really limited by the technology. It's just enabled by the technology.
Yes, because by being able to hear your voice and see your face, it's a lot easier to connect to you.
Right. I mean, it's a little bit harder in practical technomancy if you don't have any of that, because you have just a handle, somebody's Facebook handle or Twitter handle or email address or something, right? But you can still get things out of it. It's the idea that you could still listen, essentially, right? The link you craft is still going to be personal, right? So you can only have not much of something, not many visual cues. To me, is a birth date without a name any more valuable than an email address? This is just a symbol. It's just a name, right? Or a fake name and a birth date better than a handle? You yourself, Jason, said that people will put more energy into their virtual handles. I mean, if you could see past that, and kind of just in a practical way, just kind of once you get down to focusing on the computer and listening and kind of communing with the computer itself as a, just like you would otherwise attune a stone or a stick that you got with a shamanic journey, you could attune yourself to someone else's handle. If they're not trained, they're going to have invested a lot of themselves in that. How's that not a link right there? And from there, you can do healings, not healings, whatever you want, right? I mean, we're talking about this, but the techniques were just laid out right there.
Yeah, and I mean, this gets into, like, I know we're probably going to get more like hate mail on that point, but this gets into things like, okay, that's a receptive point, but you have to be in a deep trance state to do that type of work, right?
Well, at least a receptive trance state. This is
State.
well, actually, I'll say the thing that'll get us hate mail. This is one of the reasons that I do not, and when I challenge people on this for spreadsheets of results, while I do not think that video games are that useful right now, unless the video game is just purely psychedelic without any real aim. Like you don't have, there's not a win condition. There's different psychedelic immersions that you are controlling. There are games like that. Those could possibly be used. But in general, with the video games, because you cannot, it is like typing. You cannot play the video game and actually get into enough of active imagination. It's like you have you're not activating most of your imagination because the video game is like acting as a simica of imagination. Whereas like astral plane, you have to activate your imagination, you know?
So, yeah, I'd argue that old video games that were less technologically advanced involved more imagination than what modern video games do that put all the fancy visuals in front of you.
Well, old video games might be able to work, but still, really old video games, you're just dealing with text, and not so old video games, maybe. But you still have the impact that if you can actually think through winning a video game, you're also too high. Your cognitive reasoning skills are beyond the point where magic actually usually works, right?
Sure. Now, what example are you quoting? Are people trying to use video games to like curse other people?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I have heard so many examples of that. Like, and when I ask for results, I don't see it. I mean, sure, somebody will tell me results, and no one asks for the spreadsheet, so we can look at attempt versus attempt. It's not that consistent. Like, it's not like I would consider it good results. Like I've seen people like actually use stuff like World War II games where they put seals on their plane or they visualize the seal of their enemy. Now, other people say this is old school, but what I actually see is that that actually gets a little bit distracting because they can't get enough active imagination going at the same time you're playing the game, unless you're really good at playing the games. Well, me and Zach play video games, so we know we're not in the right state for magic. Or Zach can speak for himself. I mean,
yeah, no, I mean, the most I've gone out with video games is that it serves as a divination point, right? Cursory divination, not even a full divination, but it gives me hints where my mindset could be going, and it's a reflection piece. So, I mean, there was that one video game we were playing where we were like, oh shit, this is pretty like divinatory. Or
Cultist Simulator was a little horrifying because of the way it would work. But then it's just a game afterwards, right? You get past the shock of what the game's actually saying and the insights you get, and then there's the game mechanics. You're just in the game mechanics now.
Well, someone recommended back in hands-on chaos magic, man, and I think it's good advice. Right after you do magic, go play a video game because it'll occupy your mind so that you're not thinking about the magic that was done.
Right. Well, there's a whole lot of people who will be like, the video game stuff will totally work, but I've never seen convincing stuff of it.
No, I understand that. I don't think for active magic. No, I conceptualize what you're saying about that, and I think you're correct. I don't think it would be good for casting.
It's replacing too many parts of the imagination with simulated imagination.
Yep.
When we get better VR past Oculus right now, we'll see how that is, right? We'll see. I'll be the first to try it out. And when we go into science fiction lands of techno-magic, which there's a lot of techno-magic paradigms that are very science fiction like, as far as like, we've seen some, we won't name any names, but we've seen some overly technical where you need a computer science degree and you have to be able to be really, really, really competent in 3D modeling to get it to work. But what are they really doing? To me, when you actually break down the technique and the magical techniques involved versus the actual presentation layer, the magical techniques look remarkably the same. The presentation layer is where the people are putting their personal skills in and personal biases. And when you separate that out, just like if you do any other magic, you'd separate it out off across any other magic, you'd see vast differences. Like you'd see, okay, sure, a theater actor is going to apply the magical techniques in a way that is completely biased in a theater manner. When you separate out the theater, it changes. When a computer scientist applies the magical techniques, it looks like it's being applied through code, and that's the most essential thing. But when you separate out the code and know enough to separate out the code, it looks very much like thought forms and servers. Again, like it follows some of the same classic magical rules that we'd apply everywhere else, that all of a sudden these digital constructs have thought forms and servers that actually they might become self-aware, as we know servers can, but still basic same rules, same basic meta rules seem to be applying. We have different models to explain it, but the process seems the same, even despite having these hugely techno-jargon systems that only make sense to the individual, you know?
Well, right. And I mean, that gets into like, you know, more elitist mindsets there where it's like, okay, if that's your shtick, you're going to go all into it, but you can't expect everyone else to get into it, right? Because that's specialized knowledge.
Well, I mean, you know, that's the thing about some of this, right? I'm saying you can do a lot of this with off the shelf stuff, like, okay,
Absolutely.
free Zoom, free Google Hangouts, right? You know, free shared virtual screens, sharing an image back and forth while you're just talking, you know, chanting the same thing. These are all the same techniques we're using. The difference is we're making a virtualized channel instead of being in person. We're just ignoring the space issue altogether. And certainly you can use certain tools to push down the trance state. That's certainly true. We have light and sound machines. They work great to entrain your brain. We have, you know, various strobe-like functions. We even have technology that I've seen that can even better than light and sound machines. Although, like, honestly, like, as soon as I can get one, I'll get one. I'm signed up on the APA that they're just bone condension to change your brain state. Brain state changing technology certainly is real, and that's certainly valuable. That's only the first part of the active magic, right? Like that gets you in the zone to do what you need to do next, which is the active imagination, the actual the actual connection to the world, the actual projection of intention. I mean, that's one thing we haven't talked about. We kind of implied it with the astral stuff, is that, okay, you're doing this digital magic on a digital platform. Well, what's the story around that? If you somehow feel like this digital platform is so separate from the world, just like if you hate your computer, do you think it's going to manifest? Like, if those are the assumptions, oh, this is the digital world, it's gonna, that assumption is gonna get put into the vibe, like, right? The information you put out there is gonna be, this is just the digital world. It'll be there with the intention, the consciousness you put onto the overlay of the digital spell. If you think that there's a, you can reach through the digital world to the real world, that's fine. Maybe you don't even need to reach out to the digital world to the real world, right? I mean, at this point, if you're doing a money spell, you know, is it better to ask the spirits to go find gold in some cavernous ruin, which maybe you get a nugget? Or is it better to actually get clients in digital fashions, which is more valuable right now?
Yep.
That's a different kind of buried treasure, isn't it?
Right, but if you conceive of it as not the same kind of buried treasure, it's not. Right? The spirits, do they care? Their vibrations, right? In a way, they're not going to carry some of the spirit and say, get me buried treasure. Okay, well, if buried means buried in the earth, that's the only way it can come about. If
Right.
it means hidden in some internet trove of confusion and chaos and darkness, because it's darkness for you if you can't see it, well, then it opens up the possibility of that various spirit going and find buried treasure on the internet, right? It's a conceptual leap from where people are at to say, oh, yes, the technology isn't really the enemy. I mean, I'm saying that, but it's really like a conceptual leap. Buried treasure could mean buried out there in the internet somewhere, which is an amorphous proto interconnections of all people, right? Not all people, but most people. And if that's true, why can't we say something like that? Like
Well, even on the point, like, let's just do this for deliveries. It's like, okay, you do Uber Eats or Foodora or whatever, right? It's like, all right, you're ordering something that is amorphous, but then you're getting a physical product out of it. How's that any different in this piece?
Well, that's another way. That's a way to conceive of it. Like, you are already using the internet to magically get stuff.
Yeah. It's like, okay, you order something from Amazon. Do you know where that came from? I don't.
So, Andrea, why don't you tell me how you use something like Google Maps, something that people are just getting used to using all the time now?
Google Maps is easy, right? That one is an easy one people can do for blessings, for whatever, right? Think about it. Like, Google Maps is the same as a physical map. People have used physical maps for magic for thousands of years, right? It's just it's a digital map on a screen, right? So if you can pick a location in Google Maps, right, it's still a link to the place. Once you get past the digitalized fact that it's a map, that is still a link to a place. In fact, a geocoded Google Maps is possibly a better link to a place than old maps. It's simply like an exact coordinate map to a physical place. And in fact, Google has helped you out even more with that, right? Because you can literally look at a house on most houses on Google Maps and like actually get a visual representation of a house where you're also getting a representation of the location. Those are all links, right? That's a link technology. I mean, it's no different if you conceive of it versus the seal of a spirit versus a geolocational map. I mean, one is evoking a place and one is evoking a sort of idea, you know, but there's similarly symbols that kind of link to something. Then if you conceive of it that way, you can get a vibe off a certain house, you can bless a house, you can do whatever, right? You can create opportunities for a house.
Hell, you could click on satellite view and hover over the house like a goddamn god.
Well, yes, and that could be the whole visualization, right? Like, especially like, you know, if you're trying to protect somebody or bless somebody, especially with COVID, right? Like, this is an easy blessing, right? Send the angels down through the visual screen. Like, it's like literally like heaven coming down, right? I mean, that's literally the metaphor, angels coming down to protect a house. I mean, we talk about angels, but like it could be any god form, really. I mean, that's easy. But the big jump there is to view that digitized version of the map as a symbol, like any other symbol that links to an actual place. That's the leap. Right, that's the anchor point, right? That's the same kind of anchoring problem that you have. Like, if you are already kind of thinking about the narrative around the technology as, oh, I can't do this, well, then what's the answer, right? When actually, as far as symbol sets go, Google Maps is more exact. Actually, it's technically a better symbol set. It's pretty exact with geocoded data. And that's not quite as good as having someone's blood, but it's pretty good as having, not quite as good as having maybe a rock from that exact place, you know.
Well, right. And I could attest, actually having done that type of work when I was doing experimental feng shui, it was pretty good. It was pretty much like, boom, it was right on the money when I was doing that type of work.
With Google Maps, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna make a bold statement. I'm gonna say that, like, back in the day, hey, yeah, that place you want me to cast a spell on, send me some dirt from that location. That's all they had, man. In a way, the Google Map might actually be a better link than the rock or the dirt from the physical location, because that's all you had.
Well, at least it's a more convenient way, right? If you have to ask someone to get dirt or get artifacts from that place, that is going to be inconvenient a lot of times. Plus that all of our enemies nowadays, they usually aren't that close to us because most people aren't that social, right? Our enemies are people who are trying to actually attack you on the digital front. Because why? Because there's more money on the digital front. Like even before COVID, there was a lot more money to be made on the digital front. How do you sell books? Digital front. How do you do this? Digital front. Like already it was moving in a way that like maybe people don't actually go to conventions as much because they make just enough staying in their home and have a good digital front, you know?
Well, I mean, look at it this way, man. Something I'm seeing lately with all the different protests and back and forth, people are doxing each other and sending digital media to each other's employers to get other people in trouble who they've never met in real life. And how's that any different than a curse? So I'm contacting your employer, screenshots of something you said on the internet. So,
well, I mean, but you could also do blessings. I want to say that, right? But yes, that's exactly what's going on. People getting mid-spirited about digital things. And in fact, the fact that that's going on tells you how porous that it isn't very different than if you're actively working with lots of spirits, right? The astral world is very porous. At this point, the digital world is very porous. It's very porous to the physical world, easily, because a person can easily reach through with information to contact somebody else. And like you said, Deox is a perfect example where it has a meaningful effect. So it's much more porous at this point. And that's partially because the technology is there to make it more porous. But that's partially because, anger, people get more motivated to do stuff with anger, unfortunately, than anything else, But it was always that porous. Like you could do this stuff with the internet 10 years ago. Just people just didn't because there was some civility, but it was still that porous. Like that's the thing, right? Like this is also why if it's so porous, you need to have proper magical protections, right? Because at least that gives you some sort of spiritual protection from that very aspect of things going on right now. To a point, I mean, I still lost my Facebook, but then again, I put up the Facebook as a sacrifice for other things beforehand anyway, right? So, hey, like, look, attack the Facebook. That's what you really want to attack if you want to take me out. There you go. Great job there. I really care. Not.
as a side note, hey, you out there think about doxing me? My employer already knows that I'm crazy. Doesn't matter.
Nice. That was great, Jason. Crazy like a fox. Jason Caldwell. That was great, Jason. So, geomantic magic is very easy. That one, that's easy. You can even do your own house blessing from Google. That's to kind of end our first hour. Let's talk about that for a second. Like, literally look at your house, your apartment on Google Maps, and then like just basically do the same thing we're talking about. Like, basically stare. You got to sit with your computer a little before you try anything, right? Then there's better ways to bless it. But maybe you just kind of go, if you got a favored spirit or something like that, or maybe just positive vibes, right? Positive vibes, easy. Just put a smile on your face and concentrate hard on that geolocation, and then watch what happens to the environment. Although, like, you still got to fill up the environment, so it might take a little longer. But that's a simple magic attempt right there. It's literally put a huge smile on your face, as big as you can, hold it, and then just concentrate on the geolocation. Or if you even better want to have a double blind study, get a friend, tell them you're going to try an experiment, and do that to their house at a random time that you don't tell them, and then ask them how their house felt the next day, without telling them what the motion is that you're going to put on, and just concentrate on that point.
Yeah, and I mean the geo linking point, like that would have made my life easier when I was doing the test, because I was doing it more old school, being like, give me I did a ghetto outline on a piece of paper, and I'm like, this is the address. But the geo linking, if I had a picture, would be much easier.
Jason's quiet. Just kind of, okay, I'm going to go do this now. I got some people. Think it right, Jason. He's got that head nod, which you can't see because we're on Zoom and it's on speaker view.
Well, as I keep nodding my head, you know, I'm kind of like the biblical God. I will bless who I want to bless. I will curse who I want to curse.
Did you just go there, man? You just went there.
You just went there. And that's the hour. This is Deeper Down the Rabbit Hole. And in case you didn't hear our sponsor at the beginning of the show, we're sponsored by the Wujijin Center. The Wujijin Center offers full divinational support with Chinese astrology, I Ching, tarot. We also offer various healing technologies. There's virtual acupuncture, which is acupressure, telehealth. If you're in Toronto, we're actually reopening for acupuncture. We have Qigong classes, Reiki teaching, all that. Zach, what's the URL?
URL for Wujixuan is wujixuan.ca. And also, if you guys want all the goodies that we've done for post shows, you can become a TIN sponsor at the link. So that is resultsoverimage.teachable.com/p/tin-sponsor.
Right. Very good. We will get the last show up as soon as possible. We had some issues. It's just a little delayed, but it's going to be up there as soon as possible. And with that, we're going to do our normal, take a 5-minute bio break and let people, the sponsors, which I think almost everyone is, if there's anyone who's not a sponsor, become a sponsor now. And we'll let you stay in the second part of the class. We're going to actually do some actual techno-magic, where we're actually going to imbue our computers, and we're going to kind of go over some things to actually, in practice, be able to do this more and give you some practical ideas if you have a business sales kind of conversation or anything that you could do with your conferences, as well as some basic techno-magic that we'll cover in practice, not in theory. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. I'm going to pause it. Also, with the exercise that we're going to do today, we'll pause. If anyone's uncomfortable being on video, we'll pause the recording while we're doing that, so that way you can actually participate. We're going to do some of the same exercises that we did a little bit earlier with Qigong, just slightly different, just to kind of bring the point home about this. So 5 minutes, and then we'll be right back.